The last thing Noel Adesanya ever sent his wife was 3 words: "Coming home now." He sent that message at 6:47 in the evening on a Tuesday in early November. His car was found 11 miles from their house, engine still running, door open, his coffee still warm in the cup holder. His phone was on the seat. His wallet was in his jacket on the back seat. His daughter's birthday was in 4 days. He was 29 years old. He was never seen again. And what makes this case different from the thousands of missing persons reports filed every year in this country, what makes detectives and psychologists who've studied it still shake their heads more than 2 years later, is this: there is no explanation, not a clean one, not one that holds up when you press on it, not one that accounts for every detail. This is the story of what happened in Meridian, Idaho, in November of 2022. And if at the end of it you feel that cold, uncomfortable sensation of a story that doesn't quite close, that's not a mistake. That's just what this case is. Noel Adesanya had grown up in Lagos, Nigeria, the third son of a retired civil engineer and a secondary school mathematics teacher. He came to the United States on an engineering scholarship at 21, settled in Boise after his degree, and by the time he was 26, he had a job at a mid-sized construction firm, a modest 2-bedroom house, and a wife named Priya, who he'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue and proposed to 11 months later on a rainy evening outside a grocery store because, as he told the story, he hadn't been able to wait for the perfect moment. He was always like that, Priya would later tell investigators. He never waited. If he felt something, he did something. He didn't let things sit. By the fall of 2022, they had a 3-year-old daughter named Simone, who had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and who was obsessed, specifically and without compromise, with elephants. Every birthday, every Christmas, every gift had to involve an elephant in some form. In the weeks before her 4th birthday, Noel had been quietly coordinating with Priya to arrange a trip to a wildlife sanctuary 2 hours south of Boise that had an African elephant exhibit. He'd made the reservation. He'd paid the deposit. He'd told no one but Priya and his closest friend, a man named Bryce Halverson, who worked with him at the firm. None of that matters to what happened on November 8th, but I want you to know it. I want you to understand who was standing at the door of this mystery before it opened. November 8th started without incident. Noel left the house at 7:15 in the morning, which was normal. He stopped at the gas station on U-Stick Road for coffee, which was also normal. The attendant there knew him by name and confirmed he was in good spirits. He was at the job site in Eagle, Idaho by 7:50, where he spent the bulk of the day on a routine inspection of a residential development the firm was completing before winter. Bryce Halverson was with him most of the morning. He later told Detective Sandra Yee of the Meridian Police Department that Noel had seemed completely himself, upbeat, cracking jokes. At lunch they talked about the upcoming birthday trip, and Noel had been excited about it, talking about how Simone was going to lose her mind when she saw the elephants. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the crew wrapped up for the day. Noel told Bryce he had one errand to make, a hardware store run to pick up a specific type of bracket for a personal home project, and that he'd see him tomorrow. They bumped fists. Noel got in his blue 2019 Ford F-150, and Bryce watched him pull out of the job site. That was the last time anyone who knew Noel Adesanya personally saw him alive. At 5:12 p.m., security footage from a Home Depot on Fairview Avenue confirmed Noel inside the store. He bought 3 L brackets and a box of 1/4-inch screws. He paid cash, which his co-workers noted was unusual. He typically used his debit card. The cashier, a young woman named Becky, later told police she remembered him because he'd held the door open for an older couple leaving and then made a small joke about the freezing wind. He was smiling, she said, normal as anyone she'd ever helped. At 6:22 p.m., his truck appeared on a residential surveillance camera on West Pine Avenue, approximately 11 miles from his home. This was not a route that made geographic sense. Home Depot to his house was a direct 15-minute drive north. West Pine Avenue was 11 miles west, in the opposite direction, in a part of Meridian that Noel had no known connection to whatsoever. At 6:47 p.m., he sent the text, "Coming home now." At 7:30, when he hadn't arrived, Priya called his phone. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Same result. She called Bryce, who hadn't heard from him since the job site. By 8:15, she was in the car driving the route she assumed he would have taken. She found nothing. She called police at 8:47 p.m. It was a patrol officer, Officer Marcus Webb, who found the truck at 9:22 that evening, parked on a gravel easement off a dirt access road that ran parallel to a stretch of undeveloped farmland on the western edge of the city. The engine was running. The driver's door was open. Noel's phone, wallet and jacket were inside. The L brackets and screws from the hardware store were in the back seat, still in the bag. There were no keys in the ignition. The truck was push-button start. You don't need keys to run it. But keys were nowhere in the vehicle or its immediate surroundings. Noel Adesanya was not there. No footprints in the soft mud nearby that could be conclusively identified as his. No signs of struggle inside the vehicle. The coffee in the cup holder had a thin skin of cold on top, meaning it had been sitting, exposed to the November air with the door open, for somewhere between 30 and 90 minutes. The phone had a full battery. The last action on it before the text to Priya was a Google search conducted at 6:39 p.m., 8 minutes before the text. The search was 4 words long. How far is too far? Detective Sandra Yee had been with the Meridian PD for 11 years when this case landed on her desk. She had worked disappearances before. She knew what missing adults usually looked like. She knew the patterns, the financial pressures people don't tell their families about, the second lives, the mental health crises that build quietly and then break all at once. She knew not to assume the worst and not to assume the best. What she did not know, in the days following November 8th, was which of those patterns she was dealing with. Because every time she found a thread, it went nowhere useful. The financials were clean. Noel had no significant debt, no hidden accounts, no unusual withdrawals in the months preceding his disappearance. The mortgage was current. There were no gambling records, no substance use flags. His and Priya's relationship, according to every person in their social circle who Detective Yee interviewed, was solid. Not performatively solid, but genuinely so. The kind of marriage where people remarked on the ease between them. There had been no reported arguments, no known infidelities, no indication of fracture. His mental health history was limited. He'd seen a therapist briefly in 2019 following the death of his father in Lagos, but had been discharged as a patient with no ongoing diagnosis. His GP had seen him for a routine physical in September, 6 weeks before his disappearance, and he had been in excellent physical health. There was nothing in this man's life, Detective Yee said in a later interview, that explained what happened. Not a single thread that pulled cleanly. The Google search haunted her. How far is too far? She had a department's digital forensics team comb through his entire search history going back 18 months. They found nothing unusual. Work-related searches, home improvement videos, searches about elephant sanctuaries in southern Idaho, questions about Simone's preschool application process. How far is too far was, by every metric they could find, an anomaly. Not preceded by anything related, not followed up with any subsequent browsing. Just those 4 words, sitting alone in the record, 8 minutes before his final text. The search stretched 2 weeks. Volunteer teams combed the farmland surrounding the area where the truck was found. Aerial units flew grid patterns. Cadaver dogs were brought in from a department in Nampa. A portion of the nearby irrigation canal was searched by divers. Nothing, not a single trace of Noel Adesanya anywhere in the radius. Investigators turned to the hardware store again. They went back through the security footage more carefully. Not just the interior cameras, but the parking lot footage, the road-facing camera at the entrance, the coverage of the adjacent strip mall. At 5:31 p.m., approximately 19 minutes after Noel entered the store, the footage showed a black sedan, partial plate, letter number sequence Tango Lima, idling in the row adjacent to where Noel's truck was parked. The sedan was there when Noel entered. It was still there when he exited at 5:44. It followed, or appeared to follow, his truck as it left the lot and turned onto Fairview Avenue. Appeared to follow is as far as Detective Yee was willing to go in her case notes, because the black sedan appears on one camera and nowhere else on the route after that. When investigators ran the partial plate, they identified 17 vehicles in Ada County and surrounding areas that potentially matched. 12 were cleared. 5 remained outstanding as of the close of the active investigation. None was ever connected to Noel Adesanya. 3 weeks after his disappearance, a man named Owen Pressler came forward. Owen was 61 years old, a retired grain broker who lived on a small property on the northern edge of the farmland area near where Noel's truck was found. He'd seen the news coverage. He debated calling for most of those 3 weeks because, as he said, he wasn't sure if what he'd seen meant anything. On the evening of November 8th, at approximately 7:05 p.m., roughly 18 minutes after Noel's text to Priya, Owen Pressler was walking his dog along the edge of his property when he saw a man standing in the field. The field was unlit, unworked farmland. November in Meridian runs cold, and by 7 p.m. the temperature was in the mid-30s with a cutting wind. The figure, Owen described him as tall, medium-build, dark-skinned, wearing a light gray jacket, was standing approximately 60 yards out, in the middle of the field, completely still. Owen called out. The man didn't turn. He stood there, Owen said, for what he estimated to be about 90 seconds. And then he walked, not toward Owen, not toward the road, but deeper into the field. He walked steadily with no particular urgency, until the darkness swallowed him. Owen watched for a while, he said. The man did not come back. The description Pressler provided, height, build, jacket color, matched Noel Adesanya. Detective Yee had Owen work with a department sketch artist and then showed him a photo lineup that included Noel's image among 7 others. Owen Pressler picked Noel Adesanya's photograph without hesitation. That's him, he said. That's the man in the field. Police returned to the area, went over it again, found nothing, no trace. The field after those 60 yards became harder, drier ground, less hospitable to footprints. The trail simply ran out. Here is where the case becomes genuinely difficult to process, because the explanation that investigators, and eventually the psychologist brought in to consult, a Dr. Fatou Diallo from Boise State University's Department of Behavioral Sciences, settled on as most probable is one that relies on a complete and sudden psychological break. A dissociative event. The kind of acute mental fracture that can occur, rarely but on documented record, in individuals with no prior psychiatric history, triggered by a catastrophic convergence of internal stressors that leave no external trail. Dr. Diallo reviewed Noel's profile extensively. She noted that the 6 months preceding his disappearance had involved quiet pressures that could have been accumulating without visible symptoms. The first anniversary of his father's death was approaching. His firm had recently taken on a high-stakes project with a difficult contractor, and Priya had mentioned in passing to a friend, a detail that reached investigators through interview, that Noel had seemed a little quieter than usual in October. The Google search is consistent with someone who had, in the preceding hours or days, been processing a private internal confrontation, Dr. Diallo stated in her consultation report. The phrase "how far is too far" is ambiguous. It could represent a threshold question. How much further can I sustain what I'm currently carrying? It is not, in her professional assessment, necessarily a prelude to harm. It could just as easily be the question of a man trying to find the edge of his endurance. She was careful to add, this is a framework, not an answer. Bryce Halverson, when told of the Google search, said nothing for a long time. He never said anything to me, he said finally. Not once, and we talked every day. Simone Adesanya turned 4 on November 12th, 4 days after her father disappeared. Priya held a small gathering. The child knew something was wrong. She was 3 years old, but 3-year-olds understand absence in ways they cannot yet articulate. She asked where her father was 3 times that afternoon, and each time Priya said something gentle and indirect, the way you do when the true answer is a door you cannot open yet. The wildlife sanctuary trip did not happen. 8 months later, Priya took Simone herself. She said in subsequent interviews that she needed to, that Noel had paid for it, and that felt like something she couldn't let go unfinished. Simone loved the elephant. That part went exactly as Noel had imagined. As of this recording, Noel Adesanya's case remains officially open and unsolved. No body has been recovered. No confirmed sightings have emerged after Owen Pressler's account. The 5 uncleared vehicles from the hardware store lot have never been linked to any criminal activity connected to this case. His phone, wallet, and jacket remain in the custody of the Meridian Police Department as evidence. There is, of course, a version of this story in which Noel Adesanya walked into that field and made a choice that had been building inside him in silence for months, a choice that the people who loved him never saw coming because he never let them see it. It's the version most likely to be statistically correct, if statistics mean anything in individual human lives. Dr. Diallo holds this theory carefully and without certainty. There is another version in which that black sedan meant something, in which the partial plate and the idling and the apparent following were not coincidence, and in which what happened to Noel Adesanya was done to him, not by him. Detective Yi has never fully closed the door on this version. She has said as much on the record. And then there is the version that no one can quite articulate, but that settles in the back of your mind when you look at all the pieces laid out together. The warm coffee, the door hanging open, the cash purchase, the strange detour west, the figure standing absolutely still in the middle of a cold, empty field at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. Not running, not hiding, just standing there, and then walking away into the dark. That version doesn't have a name. It's just what remains when the other explanations don't close all the way. He was coming home, Priya said, in an interview published 14 months after his disappearance. That's what the text said. He was coming home. Whatever happened between that text and home, that's the gap I live in now. What I keep coming back to is this: most disappearances, even the strange ones, eventually resolve into something legible. A body is found, a confession surfaces, someone who knew something finally says it. The story, however terrible, eventually closes. Noel Adesanya's doesn't, and maybe that's the most frightening thing about it. Not the darkness of the ending, but the absence of one. Because what we want from a story, from any story, is the sense that things eventually resolve, that the gap between what we know and what is true is a gap we can cross. But some stories are just a field in the dark, and somewhere out in that field is an answer that may never come back.